I never thought painting someone's living room could feel like walking a tightrope. I mean, it's just walls, right? But the second she opened the door, I realized this wasn't just any living room. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books, and sunlight slanted through the curtains, catching the dust motes in a way that made it look almost sacred. She stood there, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned back loosely, and I froze, brush in hand. "Don't spill that on the carpet," she said, tilting her head. Her voice wasn't sharp, but it had this undertone, a kind of quiet authority that made me want to apologize for everything before it even happened. I set the paint can down and tried to sound casual, though my fingers were already trembling slightly. "I won't," I said, and immediately felt ridiculous. Of course I wouldn't spill it. She wasn't even looking at me directly, just scanning the ceiling as if deciding which corner needed the first stroke. But the brush felt heavier now, and my heart too. She walked past me, careful steps, like she owned the room without demanding it. I watched her hand brush against the edge of the doorway, and the movement made me realize I'd been holding my breath. I shook my head, trying to focus. Walls, paint, roller. Not her. Not the way her scent seemed to linger behind her, soft and warm. The way her laughter, when she spoke to me about the old couch, made me forget what I was supposed to be doing. We didn't talk much at first. She stood across the room, giving instructions here and there, and I tried to follow them. But I was acutely aware of how close I was standing to the wet paint, how the roller threatened to drip at any second, and how every time our hands brushed, just passing each other briefly, it felt like electricity, tiny sparks that went unnoticed by anyone else but impossible for me to ignore. At one point, I bent down to clean up a stray drip on the floor, and she came up behind me with that quiet, decisive stride that made me tense without knowing why. Her hand rested on my shoulder for just a second, long enough to startle me, short enough that I didn't dare look back. "Careful," she said, but there was something more in her eyes, a flicker that didn't match the words. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. We moved in a rhythm neither of us spoke aloud. I painted, she watched, or pretended to. And in the silences, I caught little glimpses. The way her brow furrowed slightly when she focused, the way her lips curved just before she laughed, like she was holding back something she knew I shouldn't see. Then it happened. I was reaching for the roller tray, and she stepped too close. The wall behind me was still wet, and I barely had time to register the pressure before she pressed me gently, but insistently, against it. My body stiffened. Our eyes met, and there was this sudden, jarring pause, as if the air between us had shifted, thickened. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. My hands hovered over the roller tray like I could make it all normal again by sheer will. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop noticing her hand brushing mine when she pulled back. Couldn't stop seeing the way her gaze lingered for a heartbeat too long. And as I stepped back, trying to pretend it was nothing, I felt it. That undeniable, slow-burning awareness that this, whatever this was just beginning. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the wall, imagining her next move, but I do know one thing. I couldn't stop thinking about the weight of her against me, even after she turned away. I hadn't expected to see her again so soon. The smell of fresh paint still lingered faintly in my clothes, and I realized halfway there that I'd checked my reflection in the mirror twice. Like seeing me wasn't the point, seeing her was. She was in the middle of rearranging books on a shelf, the kind of movement that looked effortless until I realized how carefully she balanced each one, like the slightest misstep would ruin something I couldn't see. I set down the box of supplies I'd brought and tried not to stare. Her hair had come loose, strands falling along her cheeks, and for a moment, she looked tired in a way that made her human, not untouchable. "Thanks for coming back," she said without looking at me. Her voice clipped just enough to keep me at a distance. I nodded, feeling the quiet weight of her reserve. She didn't smile, didn't invite me in with words or gesture. It wasn't cold, it was careful. I unpacked the rollers and brushes and moved to the corner she'd pointed out last time. From where I stood, I could see her hands, the way they paused on the shelf, hovering over a book she seemed unsure about. I noticed how the skin at her knuckles was slightly dry, the faint tremor when she reached for a heavier volume. Little things I wouldn't normally see in anyone else stuck in my mind. We worked side by side in silence for a while. The room smelled of paint and old paper, and somewhere, a clock ticked too loudly. I dared a glance at her, noticing the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her shoulders seemed heavier when she thought no one was looking. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. Finally, she straightened and let out a soft sigh. I didn't get much sleep last night, she admitted, almost as if she had to tell someone, even briefly, even if that someone was me. She kept her gaze on the books, but the tremor in her voice betrayed a vulnerability I hadn't expected. I felt a strange hesitation, part respect, part fear of breaking the fragile wall she'd built. You should rest, I said quietly. I can handle the shelving. She shook her head, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. It's fine. I like doing it myself. Her laugh was soft, almost apologetic, like she didn't quite know why she was telling me anything at all. And in that tiny, almost imperceptible sound, something unspoken passed between us. Something that was charged but forbidden, tender but impossible to name. I watched her carefully, noting the way her lips pressed together, how her fingers lingered on the edge of a book before letting go, the quiet exhaustion in her posture. She was confident, yes, but there were cracks, a vulnerability she didn't show often, and yet she'd just let me glimpse them, just a flicker. Then, without warning, she leaned over to reach for a book on the top shelf, and I stepped closer to steady the ladder. Our hands brushed, just for a moment. I could feel the warmth of her skin through the thin cotton of her glove. She froze, and I froze, and for a heartbeat, the room felt smaller, heavier, charged in a way that didn't need words. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, her fingers lingered against mine just long enough for me to feel it, a soft, almost forbidden connection, and then she stepped back, adjusting her stance as if nothing had happened. But I knew that small, electric pause would linger with me long after I left. I caught my breath, trying to convince myself it was nothing, while my mind replayed it endlessly. The faint tremor in her laugh, the tired curve of her shoulders, the brush of her hand, and the quiet, impossible pull I already couldn't resist. The rain tapped insistently against the window, a steady rhythm that made the room feel smaller, more private than it really was. She was perched on the edge of the sofa, cataloging receipts with that meticulous attention to detail I'd come to notice, and I was sitting opposite her, pretending to read the instructions for the new roller I'd brought. But my eyes kept straying, catching the way her fingers paused mid-page, or the faint crease at the corner of her brow. I shouldn't have asked you to come back tonight, she said suddenly, without looking up. The words landed softly, like a question and an apology at once. I hesitated, not sure if she wanted reassurance or silence. It's fine, I said carefully. I don't mind. The words sounded thinner than I wanted, but I couldn't force anything more out without risking the fragile rhythm between us. We worked side by side in the dim light. The storm made the ceiling creak, and I felt my pulse in my ears, a reminder that I was aware of her in ways I wasn't supposed to be. The air was warm, but every brushstroke seemed to carry tension, mine stiff, hers controlled but effortless. When our elbows brushed as I reached for a can of paint, I froze. She didn't react, and that made it worse. My stomach twisted with the knowledge that she felt it too, but neither of us would speak. Then her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and tensed for the briefest moment before turning the screen down. A name flashed, someone I couldn't place immediately, and the way she pressed her lips together told me the conversation could have been complicated. I swallowed hard, realizing I was holding my breath, watching her guard rise like a shutter across a window. Nothing important, she said, voice casual, but the flicker in her eyes betrayed her. I wanted to ask, to lean closer and probe, but I knew better. I stayed still, pretending to adjust the paint tray, but I couldn't stop noticing the faint scent of her perfume, the soft line of her jaw in the low light, or the subtle tremor in her hand as she returned to the papers. We fell into a quiet rhythm, side by side, but separated by inches that felt like miles. Every so often, I caught her glance lingering too long, or a half-smile that vanished the instant I noticed. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance, but my hand stayed in my lap. Useless. My mind ran through every possible consequence, every line we couldn't cross. The storm intensified, and a sudden gust rattled the window. She flinched slightly, and without thinking, I moved closer to steady the curtain. Our knees brushed, and I caught the almost imperceptible inhale she let out. My heart skipped, a warning and a thrill all at once. I wanted to say something, anything, but the word stuck. Then the moment almost broke. I leaned slightly, just to ask if she wanted help with the ledger, and our faces were closer than they should have been. Close enough that I could see the moisture on her lashes, the way her pulse quickened at her neck. She looked at me, eyes wide for a fraction of a second, and I froze. The air between us was taut, electric, and for one terrible, delicious heartbeat, I thought we might cross that invisible line. But she blinked, shifted, and smiled. A soft, careful smile that dissolved the tension like sand through fingers. "I think I've got it," she said, turning her attention back to the papers. My chest ached, and I realized I'd been holding my breath the entire time. The storm raged outside, but inside, the silence was louder, heavier, more charged than any words could have been. And I couldn't stop thinking about that fraction of a second when almost, just almost, everything could have changed. I didn't know how long we'd been sitting there, just the two of us, the paint cans forgotten, brushes idle, the storm outside muffled by thick walls. The room smelled faintly of wet plaster and lemon polish, but somehow it felt heavier, like the air itself was waiting for one of us to say something that had been hovering between us for days. She was perched on the edge of the sofa, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the floor. I stood near the doorway, hands shoved deep in my pockets, trying to appear casual, but I could feel it, the tension vibrating between us like a live wire. She started, then stopped. She looked up at me, eyes wide, searching, as if trying to measure how much I could bear. "What are we even doing?" The question wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It struck through the silence like glass. I wanted to answer, to reassure her, or convince myself I knew the right words, but all I could do was stand there, watching her. Her hair had come loose again, a stray strand brushing her cheek. Her hands gripped her knees as if holding herself together, and I realized I'd never seen her like this before. Not guarded, not confident, just raw. "I mean," she continued, voice trembling just slightly, whatever this is, it doesn't feel normal. And I don't know if it's supposed to." She paused, biting her lip, then looked away, letting the words hang in the space between us. I moved a step closer, careful not to close the space too fast. "I don't either," I admitted softly, almost a whisper. My heart thudded against my ribs, loud enough that I thought she might hear it. "I can't pretend anymore, not when it feels like this every time I'm around you." She flinched at my words, and I realized how fragile this was. Too fragile for recklessness, too volatile for comfort. We'd been walking along a line neither of us wanted to name, and now the line was gone, leaving only the fall. She lifted her eyes, meeting mine, and for a moment it felt like the storm outside had moved inside her gaze. "I don't want to ruin anything," she said. I can't stop thinking about it. About you. And me. And her voice broke, and she swallowed. The room went quiet again, thick with the weight of unspoken truths. I stepped a little closer, but still kept a respectful distance. "I know," I said. "I can't either." My hands itched to reach for her, to bridge the impossible gap, but I held back. Some things, I realized, couldn't be fixed by touch. We didn't move for what felt like hours, just breathing, watching, feeling. The silence spoke louder than any words ever could. Every glance, every subtle shift, carried a weight I hadn't known could exist between two people. Then she looked down, shoulders slumping, and whispered, barely audible, but it landed like a stone in my chest. "I think I'm scared of what I want." And just like that, the room contracted around me. I could feel her fear, her honesty, more real than anything I'd known. I wanted to say something to make it better, but there was nothing. There was only the ache of understanding, raw and unrelenting. leaving me frozen in a silence that promised nothing would ever be the same. The afternoon light had softened, streaking gold across the room, but it didn't make things feel lighter. We were cleaning up the brushes, putting away the paint cans, the air still thick from our last conversation. I was stacking the rollers when she sat down heavily on the sofa, a hand pressed to her temple like the weight of something unseen had finally caught up. "I should probably tell you something," she said, almost to herself. Her voice was low, hesitant, like she was testing the words before letting them fall. I stopped moving, the tray of brushes in my hands suddenly heavy. "What is it?" I asked quietly, careful, like stepping wrong could shatter whatever fragile balance we'd managed. She hesitated, then sighed. "A long time ago, I lost someone I loved. Not just a partner, someone who was my anchor." Her fingers traced a thin line along the edge of the coffee table, absently, almost nervously. It was sudden. I wasn't ready, and I've carried it with me ever since. I nodded, though the words barely registered at first. I wanted to say something, anything that wouldn't sound trite, but all I could do was listen. I watched the way her eyes shone slightly in the sunlight, the fine tremor in her hands, and I realized I'd never seen her like this before. Not controlled, not composed, just raw and human. "I never talk about it," she continued, voice breaking a little. "Not to anyone. But being around you, it makes things feel different. Like it's okay to feel again. And that scares me." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "I get it," I said softly. "I've lost someone too. And sometimes it feels like you can't move without feeling guilty for surviving, or scared that you'll never feel the same again." My hands tightened on the brush tray, the words heavier than I intended. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a second, the guardedness vanished. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say more but couldn't. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It hummed with something fragile, powerful, and unspoken. Then she reached into the corner of the sofa, pulling out a small photograph, curling the edges between her fingers. I leaned slightly, careful not to intrude, and saw a younger version of her laughing with someone I didn't recognize at first. Something about the expression in her eyes, that same mix of joy and heartbreak from before. It landed like a stone in my chest. "I keep it," she said quietly, her thumb brushing the photo, "because some part of me can't let it go. But I think, seeing you, being around you, I'm learning it's okay to remember without drowning in it." I nodded, but the words barely touched the chaos inside me. I wanted to reach for her hand, to hold it, to reassure her that she wasn't alone, but I stayed still, because some moments needed to be felt, not fixed. We just sat there, her fingers on the photo, mine hovering above the brushes, and the air between us vibrated with something seismic and quiet. I could feel the shift, a subtle reordering of everything I thought I knew about her, and about myself. Then, without warning, she looked up at me, eyes soft but unsteady, and whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know what comes next, but I don't want to be afraid anymore." And in that pause, in the trembling weight of her honesty, I realized that the world we'd been skirting around had tilted ever so slightly, and nothing could put it back the way it was. The living room was quiet, but in a way that felt full, like every sound, every breath, mattered more than it should. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, sorting brushes into the tray, when she sat down beside me. Not on the sofa, not across the room, but right there, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off her. Neither of us said anything at first. The storm had passed, leaving the windows streaked with rain, sunlight filtering in soft and uneven. I glanced at her, and she glanced back, a half-smile tugging at the corner of her lips, hesitant, careful, but real. "I don't know how this, whatever this is, started," she murmured, voice low, almost lost in the quiet. "But it feels right, in a way I didn't expect." I swallowed, my hands stilling over the brushes. "I feel the same," I said softly. Not a declaration, not a confession, just the truth, simple and bare. The kind of honesty that didn't need grand gestures to matter. We sat like that for a while, side by side. I noticed how her shoulder occasionally brushed mine, accidental but electric. The light caught her hair, The faint lines at the corner of her eyes, the subtle way her fingers flexed against the fabric of her jeans. Every small detail pulled at something inside me I couldn't quite name. Then she shifted slightly, just enough for our hands to brush against each other. I froze for a heartbeat, but didn't pull away. She didn't either. Our fingers lingered against one another, tentative, exploring the space between acknowledgement and surrender. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was everything we'd been avoiding, admitting without words, letting the tension dissolve naturally into something steady, earned. I think, she started, then paused, taking a slow breath. I think it's okay to just be here. Like this. I nodded. Yeah, I whispered. Just here. No grand gestures, no sudden confessions. Just presence. The room hummed softly around us, a quiet witness to the shift that had been happening in slow motion, unnoticed until it couldn't be ignored. Her hand slid slightly, fingers brushing mine again, and this time I let her guide the touch, not speaking, not moving away. The brush tray sat forgotten beside us, the paint cans neat and dry now, irrelevant to the weight of this moment. I realized that this was enough, that the careful, slow burn of every glance, every brush of hands, every shared silence had led to a place where nothing needed to be forced. Nothing needed to be named aloud. We had crossed the invisible line in a way that felt natural, inevitable, and terrifyingly honest. She leaned back slightly, letting her head rest lightly against the wall behind her. I stayed close, our fingers still intertwined, letting the quiet settle between us like a soft blanket. There was no rush, no pressure, just the understanding that we had arrived somewhere real and fragile and entirely ours. And in that silence, in that soft, earned closeness, I felt the kind of peace that wasn't about certainty or promises. It was about being seen, finally, by someone who mattered. We didn't speak again for a long time. Not because we had nothing to say, but because saying anything would have been unnecessary. The weight of everything unsaid rested lightly in the space between us, comforting rather than unbearable. For the first time, I realized that some connections didn't need fireworks to be undeniable. Some moments didn't need words to mean everything. And we just stayed there. I still think about that living room sometimes. Not the paint, not the colors, not even the rain-streaked windows, but the way it felt to finally exist in the same space as her without pretense, without hesitation. The quiet, the soft brush of hands, the stolen glances that weren't stolen anymore. They've stayed with me in ways I didn't expect. Being around her changed me. I'm slower now, more careful with words, more aware of the weight they carry. I notice the little things, how a glance can mean more than a sentence, how silence can speak louder than any declaration. And I think it changed her too. There's a softness in her posture when she's not trying to control everything, a willingness to let someone see her cracks without fear. Love, I've learned, isn't always about fireworks or perfect moments. Sometimes it's about the pause between words, the shared breath in a quiet room, the invisible threads that finally become visible. And sometimes it's about holding someone close without needing to name it, because the presence itself is enough. I remember that first brush against her hand, the press of her against the wet wall, the fleeting almost kiss, the confessions about past heartbreaks. All of it led here. Not to a declaration, not to a tidy resolution, but to an understanding that what we had wasn't rushed or forced. It was earned, fragile, and real. Sometimes I catch myself replaying those moments. I smile at the memory of her tired laugh, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way she let me be present without asking me to fix anything. And I realize how rare it is to find someone who changes the way you look at yourself just by being there. We don't have a label. We don't have a story anyone else would understand. But we have the living room, the paint, the quiet afternoons, the brushes we set down together. And somehow, that's enough. Somehow, that is everything. If this story made you feel something, even a little, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?